Hey everyone, and welcome back to Deep Dive Daily. Today, we're diving into Justin Trudeau's resignation announcement. When he decided to step down as Canada's Prime Minister. And to help us break this down, we've got an expert in political rhetoric with us.
Mm.
In political speeches, they can be like carefully crafted performances, right?
Absolutely.
There's
That's what makes this so fascinating.
way more going on.
We think we're just hearing words, but there's this whole other layer of strategy and messaging happening
Same meets the eye.
beneath the surface.
Okay, so for those of you who might have missed it, Trudeau's been Prime Minister since 2015.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
lately, things haven't exactly been smooth sailing, particularly in this last parliamentary session. So he drops this resignation speech. And one of the first things you pointed out to me was just how short and impersonal it felt.
It's definitely a departure from his usual style.
Especially coming from someone who's usually known for his charisma
Mm-hmm.
and that whole we're in this together vibe.
Makes you wonder what's going on here.
What do you make of that?
Is this a deliberate choice, or is it a reflection of his mindset at the time?
It almost felt like he was trying to distance himself from the whole situation.
Right, and that's where it gets really interesting. By downplaying his own role and using very passive language, he subtly shifts the blame for the parliamentary gridlock onto the institution itself.
So it's not I couldn't get things done, but more like Parliament itself was the problem. That's a clever way to frame it, isn't it?
Exactly. He's shifting the narrative away from his own leadership and onto the broader political system.
Then there's that part where he says, I'm a fighter. It feels almost ironic in the context of him resigning, don't you think?
It's a curious choice of words, for sure. It makes you think about how politicians carefully choose their language to shape their legacy and how they want to be remembered.
It's like he's trying to project an image of strength,
Yeah.
even as he's stepping down.
And that's a key takeaway here. Politicians are incredibly aware of their image and how their actions will be perceived.
Okay, so we've got subtle blame shifting and a potentially calculated declaration of fighting spirit. What else jumped out at you in the speech?
Well, amidst all the vagueness and impersonal tone, there's this one sentence where Trudeau really lays out his achievements and defends his record.
Which part is that?
It's where he lists what he sees as the Liberal Party's accomplishments under his leadership. He talks about strengthening the middle class, the pandemic response, reconciliation efforts, defending free trade, standing with Ukraine, and fighting climate change. It's a very concise and impactful way of summing up what he wants people to remember about his time in office.
So it's like he's saying, look, despite all the challenges, we actually achieved a lot.
Precisely. And it's interesting to see how he strategically positions that positive statement within a speech that's otherwise pretty low-key.
Now, you mentioned this whole comparison to Joe Biden
Hmm.
and how he handled his succession. What's the connection there?
Well, there's a sense that Trudeau is intentionally trying to avoid the pitfalls of Biden's approach to succession. Remember how Biden essentially handpicked his successor, and that didn't sit well with everyone?
Yeah, some people felt like it wasn't a very democratic process.
Right. So Trudeau's really emphasizing the democratic process of choosing a new leader. He even explicitly says, this country deserves a real choice in the next election. That could even be seen as a subtle dig at Biden's method.
It's more about stepping aside and letting the party decide,
Right.
rather than handing the reins over to a chosen successor.
Exactly. He's positioning himself as a defender of democratic principles, even as he's exiting the political stage.
So we're seeing subtle comparisons to other leaders, attempts to control his own narrative, and a fascinating look at how much strategy goes into political speeches. This is great stuff. What else should our Deep Dive Daily listeners be paying attention to in this speech?
One thing that really stands out is Trudeau bringing up electoral reform, something he seems to regret not pushing harder for during his time in office.
Yeah, I remember that.
Remember, he initially promised to change Canada's voting system, but ultimately backtracked on that pledge.
A lot of people were disappointed he didn't follow through.
Now he's saying that he wishes they'd been able to change the way we elect our governments, implying that it could have led to a less polarized political landscape. He even specifically mentions ranked choice voting, which could have been a game changer.
For those who aren't familiar with that, could you quickly explain how ranked choice voting works?
Sure. Ranked choice voting is a system where voters rank their candidates in order of preference, instead of just choosing one. This encourages candidates to appeal to a wider range of voters instead of just focusing on their base. It's thought to lead to more moderate candidates winning, and potentially more compromise and collaboration in government.
So Trudeau is basically saying he thinks a different electoral system might have made things better, but he couldn't get it done. It feels like a bit of that blame shifting we talked about earlier, right?
There's definitely an element of that. But it's also worth noting that he acknowledges his own inability to unilaterally change the system. He emphasizes needing the support of other parties, which he didn't have.
So it's not just, I wish I'd done this, but more like, I couldn't have done it alone.
Exactly. And this leads us to another intriguing aspect of the speech, his mention of Chrystia Freeland.
Ah, yes, his deputy prime minister. What's up with that?
The way he talks about her is fascinating. He calls her Chrystia, creating this air of familiarity like they're just good pals. But it also potentially minimizes her role and downplays any serious conflict that might have contributed to her decision not to continue as his deputy.
So it's like he's trying to sweep any hints of a rift between them under the rug.
Exactly. He wants to project this image of unity even as he's announcing his departure. But that casual reference to Chrystia instead of Deputy Prime Minister Freeland could be a subtle way of diminishing her stature.
It's amazing how much can be packed into a seemingly simple choice of words, isn't it?
It really is. That's the power of language, especially in politics. Every word choice, every turn of phrase can be loaded with meaning.
Well, we've certainly uncovered a lot of those hidden meanings in Trudeau's resignation speech today. We've got subtle blame shifting, legacy building, comparisons to other world leaders, and a whole lot more. But we're not done yet. We'll be right back after a quick break to delve deeper into this fascinating speech. Welcome back to Deep Dive Daily, everyone. We're in the middle of dissecting Justin Trudeau's resignation speech. And honestly, this thing is more layered than a cake.
It's a prime example of how language can be used strategically in politics. It's not just about conveying information. It's about shaping perceptions and influencing how events are understood.
You mentioned how Trudeau refers to Chrystia Freeland simply as Chrystia. What other insights can we glean from that seemingly casual choice of words?
It kind of reinforces that sense of her being his work wife, which is a narrative that's been circulating for a while.
Right, it's like she's in this supportive role. Rather than being presented as a powerful figure in her own right.
Exactly. And that brings us back to this idea of hidden messages and how politicians carefully craft their language to shape perceptions.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. We've talked about Trudeau's subtle blame shifting, his attempt to control how his legacy is perceived, the interesting parallels to Joe Biden's situation, and his seemingly casual, but potentially calculated reference to Chrystia Freeland.
And we can't forget his expressed regret over not changing the electoral system, which suggests a certain level of disillusionment with the state of Canadian politics.
That was a really thought-provoking point. It makes you wonder how things might have played out differently if he'd been able to implement those reforms.
It certainly raises some important questions about the nature of political power, the limitations even a popular leader like Trudeau faces, and the challenges of enacting meaningful change within a complex democratic system.
It's a lot to consider.
It is, and that's why we do what we do here on Deep Dive Daily. We want to give you the tools to understand the complexities of the world around us, especially when it comes to these often opaque political processes.
Absolutely. We're all about empowering our listeners to think critically and engage with these issues on a deeper level.
Hopefully, by breaking down a speech like Trudeau's, we can help you see how much is going on beneath the surface, how language can be used to persuade, deflect, and even in a way rewrite history.
It's like learning to crack a secret code, being able to decipher those hidden messages, and understand the real game that's being played.
Exactly, and once you start seeing it, it's hard to unsee it.
So true. As we wrap up this deep dive into Trudeau's resignation speech, what's the one key takeaway you want our listeners to remember?
I think the most important thing to remember is that political speeches are rarely just about the words themselves. They're carefully constructed performances designed to achieve very specific goals, whether that's shaping perceptions, controlling narratives, or subtly advancing a particular agenda.
So we should always be listening with a critical ear, paying attention not just to what's being said, but also to what's not being said and how it's all being framed.
Precisely. Because often the most impactful messages are the ones that are hidden in plain sight. They're the ones that operate on a subconscious level, influencing our opinions and beliefs without us even realizing it.
And that's the beauty of these deep dives. We're giving you the tools to be a more informed and engaged citizen, to be able to see those hidden messages and understand the tactics being used.
I'm not just here to entertain, we're here to empower you to think for yourselves and ask the right questions.
So next time you hear a major political speech, don't just take it at face value. Think about the context, the language choices, the things that are being said, and the things that are being left unsaid.
Ask yourself, what's the speaker's real goal? What are they trying to achieve with this speech? And how are they using language to get there?
Because when you start looking for those hidden messages, you'll be surprised at what you find.
It's like a whole new world opens up, a world where you're not just passively consuming information, but actively engaging with it and deciphering its hidden meanings.
Well said. And to wrap things up, we want to leave our Deep Dive Daily listeners with a final thought-provoking question. Knowing what we now know about the subtext and the strategies behind these carefully constructed speeches, how will you approach listening to speeches from world leaders in the future?
Will you listen for those subtle cues, those hidden messages, those attempts to shape the narrative? Or will you just accept what you're being told at face value?
The choice is yours. But we hope that by joining us on this deep dive, you'll be better equipped to make that choice. Thanks for listening to Deep Dive Daily. We'll be back soon with another deep dive into a fascinating topic. Welcome back to Deep Dive Daily. It's amazing how much we can uncover. We take the time to really analyze something like a resignation speech. You might think, it's just a simple announcement, but there's so much more going on beneath the surface.
It's like we've been saying. These speeches are carefully crafted and every word choice is deliberate. Politicians know how to use language to their advantage.
And we've seen some prime examples of that today with Trudeau's speech. He's trying to shape his legacy, subtly shift blame, and control the narrative, all while appearing to just be giving a straightforward farewell.
Remember the part where he talks about Chrystia Freeland? Simply calling her Chrystia. We talked about how that might downplay her role. But it also raises a question. What does this tell us about their relationship? And the dynamics within the Liberal Party? Was there tension behind the scenes? We're left to speculate. And that's part of the strategy.
It's like a little puzzle, isn't it? Trying to piece together the clues and figure out what's really going on. And it's a puzzle that's relevant to all of us, even if you're not a die-hard political junkie.
Absolutely. Because these same tactics, these same subtle uses of language are used everywhere, not just in politics. Think about advertising, marketing, even everyday conversations. People are constantly trying to persuade you, influence your thinking, and shape your perceptions.
So what we're learning today isn't just about understanding Justin Trudeau's resignation speech. It's about developing a more critical ear, a more discerning eye for the way language is used to influence us.
It's about becoming a more savvy consumer of information in a world that's saturated with messages.
And that's what we're all about here on Deep Dive Daily. We want to equip you with the tools to navigate this complex world, to think for yourselves, and to not be swayed by rhetoric or manipulation.
Because when you can see through the spin and understand the real game, you're empowered to make more informed choices.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Justin Trudeau's resignation speech, we want to leave you with this. Pay attention to the language being used around you. Don't just accept things at face value. Dig deeper, ask questions, and think critically. Who knows what you might discover?
Thanks for joining us on Deep Dive Daily.
Until next time, stay curious and keep diving deep.